Seen a lot of confusion about technology, and a lot of people, especially because most people seem to be materialists now, confuse technology for material. They think that technology is a non-natural material, and they have trouble, which is fair enough, drawing the lines between what is natural, when does a natural component become a technology, because if you think of it this way, it's not as though we have access to non-natural materials. So what combination or refinement of materials turns them into technology? So that's what I'd like to explore now. So my general thesis is that there are non-material technologies. And I think this is important because you can't really understand how technology comes to be if you think it's material. As I mentioned, I think the problem becomes what's natural, what's not natural, when do natural materials become technology? This really doesn't make any sense as a way to talk. So what is driving technology? So let me give you an example of something I think is a technology that maybe most people don't think of. I think that singing is a technology, right? Methods and ways of singing are actual technologies. Maybe not all of them, but maybe most of them. Where they come from, really don't. Not too interested in. There's certainly forms of singing that some cultures have and other cultures don't, for example, right? And so it seems like those cultures developed a certain type of technology around the voice that we would call singing that is different from what other people have. And the question might be, why? And the answer to that might be something like, well, technology is a function of what you value. Another example that I think might be clear is wood joints. So I don't know if you've ever seen any of these wood joint carpentry videos, especially the shorts. I rather enjoy some of them when they pop up. And they make certain types of cuts in wood, and then they put the two pieces of wood together. Maybe they add some of those cut pieces back, or maybe not. And voila, you have two pieces of wood that hold themselves together. Obviously that's kind of amazing and really cool. That's why I like to watch it. But what went on there? Well, there's a technology behind, which is to say a level of sophistication of thinking, right, which enabled something that isn't there, we'll say, just randomly within nature. Now, it might be inspired by nature, right? But wood joints in particular, nature doesn't build wood joints ever, right? We have cut wood, and you can use normal cut boards. I know most of our lumber is treated and cut and special, but you don't need that to do wood joints. You just need to plane out a piece of wood, which you can do by hand. Not recommended, but like people do, it can be done. Once the wood is milled into basic shapes, you can fit those shapes together to form frames, to form boxes, to form all kinds of interesting things. And joining them together is very important, right? Cabinetry is a big deal. I rather like cabinetry, especially wooden cabinetry. So how about a nut and a bolt, right? Well, obviously metal has to be refined, but it's not unnatural. Like the metal comes from the earth, and refinement is really just a process of filtering or removing things. Remove stuff, right? And sometimes in really sophisticated metallurgy, you add stuff actually, right, to get certain qualities out of the metal. Doing all that chemistry is a technology, right? I think it's a technology, knowing how hot the fire should be for how long. A good example of this is Japanese katanas, right? They hand, especially if they're hand built, they fold the metal over and over and over again. It takes an unbelievable amount of time. You have to watch it pretty much 24/7 or have it watched 24/7. You have to fold the blade, over and over again. And those blades were the sharpest blades in the world for years. For years. There's also something called Damascus steel, right? This is famous because it actually has nanoparticles in it. Didn't know there were nanoparticles before science, but there were also nanoparticles in Rome in some of their glassware. And so the technology to make these things has, in some cases, been lost. We don't I'm not sure if we figured out how to make Damascus steel again, but because it can be lost, and a lot of technology has been lost over the years, it seems like a big deal. And the thing is, how you do things matters. So I would argue that procedures and methods that you use for things are technology. And the person that has that technology has an advantage over the person that doesn't. This could be something sophisticated like how to run a particular type of business. Or it can be something sort of very elite, like how to make a katana, right? Or how to make Zildjian cymbals for music. That was a proprietary technology, at least it may not be anymore, but it was for like 1,000 years or something insane. That particular way of making those cymbals was a heavily guarded family secret. So that idea that you know how to do something that somebody doesn't know how to do could be considered a technology. Now, not all ideas that you have are unique are technologies. Obviously, they have to translate into a result. And it's usually the result that we see as technological. But I think that's sure. I mean, you have to witness something and label it. But the interesting thing about technology, because people talk about it as though it's apart from the world, or that it's almost like a hyperobject or an egregore or something that's controlling us, like it's part of a machine and that machine is driving us somehow, which is all nonsense talk, by the way. Just run away from those people. They must be off some kind of medication, or maybe there's a medication they need to be on that they're not. Maybe that medication hasn't been invented. I don't know. Because technology is not a neutral object in the world, right? Technology does not have equal utility everywhere. And you could think, that's kind of silly, but the bottom line is the Chinese never thought to use gunpowder for warfare. And they were warring a lot when they invented gunpowder. And why not? Because technology is functional purpose. It's the same thing, gunpowder, which is being used as an elixir for long life. I don't know if it works, but I suspect it doesn't, because we keep putting it in guns and using it to shorten life. So I guess its absence is an elixir for long life, but not its presence, right? And, some technology is the discovering of an existing material like oil, for example, for new things like gasoline, right? So you have to refine the oil, and one of the things that you can do in the refining with some of the other things that are coming up in the oil well is make gasoline for cars, right? And other technologies like refined oil from the ground comes about through replacement of older technologies. So whale oil gets replaced with oil from the ground. That's why John D. Rockefeller is the greatest animal savior, at least in terms of whales, right? He's the greatest environmentalist. He also decided, hey, this stuff spilling out of the oil wells must be good for something, and had his engineers create gasoline. So win-win for Rockefeller. So the replacement of whale oil, right? And then what happens with oil? Well, it's one of the many, I would argue, industrial revolutions that went on in the United States. New Bedford, Massachusetts was the city that lit the world. And that's a weird title, except that all the whaling was going on over there. And it's not like America was around to invent whaling. That didn't happen. But for some reason, we had better refining and better methods of capturing whales and slaughtering them, unfortunately, and superior shipping to do so. And so in the mid 1800s, this is where Moby Dick comes from, that engine is providing oil to light the world, lamps. And then, like I said, along comes Rockefeller and totally upends all that and makes it better for the whales and for the men out there. So these are all technologies. A bunch of technologies spring up, right? Harpoon technologies. Eventually, they use gunpowder to launch harpoons at whales, right? In a more industrialized way. Shipping goes from metal to steel ships, right? Carnegie industrializes the Bessemer process, which is a process that was being done in England since who knows when, but they weren't using it on an industrial scale. Carnegie figures out how to use it on an industrial scale. bang, now you get steel bridges, now you get steel ships, now you get all kinds of steel you couldn't have before. Seems like a technology, right? But really, it's just a method for dealing with ore and refining it into steel, and of a certain quality, we'll say. That's what the Bessemer process is. It's a process, but I would argue it's a technology, and industrializing it is a further refinement to that technology. So what seems to create technology is the desire for something specific, valuable, and then a bunch of experimentation to see if it can be done or gotten about or whatever. There's a lot of speculation. A lot of things are tried. If you want the greatest, almost certainly the greatest scientist ever, that's Thomas Edison. He follows the scientific method better than probably anybody else, and he's able to create the light bulb through thousands of experiments. And many other things. This is not the only thing he did. And that is, interestingly, also an industrialization. So Edison has a technology around invention and the refinement of invention, because to be fair, it's not like he figured out how to put sound on a wax cylinder or something. No, he didn't figure that out. Almost all the things he, quote, invented, except for one or two, were refinements of existing technologies that people knew about, but weren't practical. So what's driving what and who's driving who? Because a lot of people talk about technology as though it's some kind of agent in the world that's making us do things. But actually, technology is the application of human power, which is time, energy, and attention focused. That's human power. That's power, all power, towards an end to get something. And then how you do that, if you have a procedure that you come up with for doing that, that is the creation of a technology. The end result is something we also call technology, although we usually have another name for whatever that thing is. The Bessemer steel process is exactly what I described, but we call it the Bessemer steel process. We don't call it a technology necessarily. You could call the creation of a steel bridge a technology, right? You still have to know how to put the bridge together, or you could look at steel cable bridges, right? And the idea that we could make, we'll say, arbitrarily long strands of cable and then make more of them by bundling them together, and then make them thicker by bundling the bundles together. These are technologies. And because they're processes, generally, they can apply to multiple things. So the steel cable bridge, that's just rope, only with metal. It's the same weaving technologies, and maybe there's different weaving technologies that we'll say aren't available, only available that only work for natural fibers, because that's true. Or there's stuff that is only available to steel because of the nature of steel, also true, right? That wouldn't apply to natural fibers. Maybe lack of stretching, for example, along a certain axis. So all of these things are technology. When we flip it around and we say, oh, technology is controlling us and we're part of a big machine, if we're part of a big machine, that's because we did it by choice. Probably not a direct choice. And I think that might be where people are confused, direct versus indirect choice. Maybe I'll do a video on that. If you want to see that video, comment below, and that'll remind me and motivate me to do it. If you want to have electricity in your house, you need an electric company somewhere. And you could say, oh no, I've got solar and I've got whatever. Okay, but you need companies to build that stuff for you because you're not building it yourself. That's not going to happen. And so it's two different trade-offs there, right? And that life is full of those trade-offs. If you make a bunch of trade-offs you don't understand, it might feel like you're trapped in a machine and that machine won't let you go. But that's a function of the choices you've made that had consequences that you didn't understand or appreciate or look at. So that's not technology controlling you. That's you making a choice to be part of a web that includes a set of technologies that have side effects that you didn't think about and now don't like. You don't have to live in a country that charges you taxes. The odds that you'll move to a place that doesn't charge you taxes is pretty small because those places are pretty hard to live in and you just don't want to make the trade-off. So isn't the technology of government that's controlling you? And that's a thing. Like anarchists believe government is a technology that we can do without. Of course, that's ridiculous. They just don't understand human behavior. Socialists view it much the same. I mean, there's a trick of socialism. I have a video about that, right? They play this little magic trick on you mentally. They also don't believe that you need government, right? They treat it as a technology that's optional or something, but it's not. And I think it's fair to treat governments as technologies. There are certainly technological ways in which we interact as a group. And the thing is, we lose technologies all the time. In computers, we've lost so many technologies, I couldn't even begin to list them. It would take hours. Just the ones I know about. That's probably not even half of them. And if you don't believe me, again, the Damascus steel is pretty old, and that has nanotech in it. So where does all this leave us in terms of technology? Technologies are tools. We control them. We use them like a hammer, either to hammer in nails to build something or to kill someone, because that's a thing that people do. Unfortunately, I wish they wouldn't. And the technology does not use us. Other people may use technology against us, as in the case of the hammer-wielding psychopath who wants to kill you. And there's not much you can do about that. So be careful what technological trade-offs you've made, and keep in mind that technologies do vanish. I mean, the Roman Empire had underwater setting concrete, which I think we figured out how to do about 70 years ago, max, something like that. Concrete in general, lost for years. And why was that lost? Right? Well, it was lost because of the Dark Ages. The Dark Ages it's not a loss of the methodologies of the technologies, because in many cases they weren't lost, although a few were. It's a loss of the need for them due to population collapse. Population collapses, you don't need these technologies, things look kind of dark. Fair enough. You can't build huge concrete structures anymore. You can't build piers on islands in the ocean because you have underwater setting concrete anymore, right? You don't necessarily have the need to rebuild the Roman Colosseum or something of that size because you don't have the population. And so those technologies appear lost, and they were lost. They were lost in terms of their requirement. Rome required those things to be Rome. You couldn't be Rome and not have those technologies. There's a trade-off for being Rome. Maybe the collapse is one of them. Maybe horrible dictatorships is another one. I don't know. I'm not making claims here. I'm just saying, when you're part of these technologies, and maybe you were born into it, but you can go live in the woods by yourself alone with no advanced technologies. And a lot of people object to this. And I'm like, well, the Amish exist. I don't know what to tell you. Of course, technologies are optional. Of course, that machine doesn't have to crush you. You can go into hypotheticals about whether or not or how long before they get crushed by technology. But they're doing pretty good so far. And according to history, there's no reason to think that that's a universal. Maybe it affects a lot of people, but maybe one of those people doesn't have to be you. And I think that's important to consider. I mean, technologies are all about trade-offs. Maybe hidden trade-offs, because again, technologies look a lot like, quote, hyperobjects or, quote, egregores. It's a silly way to talk. Because they're generally leveraged to make one person or many people do things that size person or peoples couldn't do. With a crane, you can lift rocks that would take 30 people to lift. It's not that the ancient Egyptians couldn't move those stones. It just took a lot more people. And it's not that maybe they didn't have cranes or something, and maybe they didn't have a, quote, technology that we don't have. All of those things seem to be true. There's plenty of indication of all of them. So what's the trade-off? The trade-off is, if you want really big objects like the pyramids, you have to build a bunch of technologies that interact with each other to create things like construction companies that can build a skyscraper. Okay, fair enough. You want skyscrapers? You're going to have a bunch of humans acting as cogs, intelligent cogs though, and that's actually really important in most technologies, within this machine that is really a conglomeration of technologies pointed towards a certain end. And that end may be to build a skyscraper, or to build a tunnel, or to build an aqueduct halfway across the state, or several countries if you're in Europe. And there's a trade-off there, right? And usually, like, cities are all technologically enabled. It's always amusing to me when people who live in cities go, "Oh, I feel oppressed by technology." I'm like, move out of the city. It's not that hard, right? You could live in a trailer in the Midwest. No one will notice. Everybody else does. So not a big deal. But you don't want to do that, right? You want your comfort. Well, your comfort comes at a cost. And that cost is that you're under the control of a bunch of technologies. And so, yeah, from your perspective, they could be tyrannical, but they're not actually machines. At least they're not machines that aren't under your control. You can opt out of the internet. You can shut off your cell phone so it doesn't make any noise while you're doing videos. How do I know? Because I do it all the time. Isn't that hard? Right? You can do that. Of course, that takes willpower, and it takes discipline, and it takes a deliberate, focused time, energy, and attention, or power. You have to assert your power, what little of it you may have, on the technology, or the technology owns you. Of course it does. Right? But it's not the technology that's owning you. It's whoever's driving the technology. So someone out there is pushing ads to this phone. They drive that. Is it the phone doing that? No, their phone's it's just a mirror. It's just a mirror, right? It's just going to focus back on you, whatever you're focusing on it. That's it. It's a mirror. So it doesn't own you. You can shut it off. You can go without it. There's some trade-offs, and people can't get in touch with you quite as easily. Maybe those are worthwhile trade-offs. I don't know. I remember a time before cell phones. So, or at least these small handheld ones, when car phones existed, but they were so expensive, only wealthy people had them. I remember those times. Better times in many ways. But the technology doesn't own us now either. It's only our engagement with it that makes it seem that way. And the more you put the onus on the technology, or the tech elites, or the tech bros, or whatever, the less you understand, sort of globally, like you training yourself in a negative way to believe something negative, that you have power, that you can take your time, energy, and attention and focus them using discipline towards a goal and achieve that goal. And that is your technology, right? The way you do that, the way you develop what you want to do into a set of procedures, and you can use that, because it's leverage, to do things. And a fine example of this is I have a very mild case of obsessive compulsive disorder, and I have weaponized that against the world. And so I remember years ago, my friend needed some help. He had a bookkeeper who was in with his partner, who stole quite a bit of money from his company, and he left, but the bookkeeper stayed. She was trying to manage the books and doing a very poor job of it, whether she was incompetent or embezzling or whatever, I don't know. He was also a mess, so I'm not going to let him off the hook. But he needed to go through the billing, and I was working for him at the time, and so I did in 4 hours. She couldn't get it straight in several visits over several months. I just did it in 4 hours, sat there and did it. And I developed a process for what to look for, how to look for it, how to order the pages, how to flip them quickly, like the whole thing. I had this down to a science. It was great. And I just flipped through it, did the books, redid them. So within 4 hours, I did them twice, actually, to make sure they were correct, right? You don't want to use just once. It's accounting is, you double up everything in accounting as a spot check. And that was a technology that I developed to make sure that his books were straight. And of course they were a mess, but we fixed them. And being able to do that is amazing. But almost everybody, not everybody, but almost everybody has the ability to do that. The more time, though, you spend on worrying about the machine and how technology is you're running you over, or AI is taking your job, which it absolutely is not. The less time, energy, and attention you have to spend on leveraging your power as a technology towards something for you. And it can be as simple and benign and basic as, well, if you learn AI, it won't take your job because you'll be the one pushing the AI buttons. Sure, that's fair. That a lot of people do that, and good for them. Or it can be something else, like, oh, okay, well, maybe I'm a customer service person and AI is going to take over customer service, which it may do some of that. Maybe it's doing some of that now. So I'll just learn another skill. Right. Instead of using your energy on anxiety about AI or robots taking over, you could harness that energy away from anxiety and into something productive, maybe working with a group of people to do something or build something that AI can't take away and robots can't do. Robots need maintenance. So they may be able to do maintenance tasks, but somebody has to maintain the robots. Nobody told you that, huh? And so, yeah, maybe you learn that, right? Or maybe you give it all up and go farming or ranching or gold prospecting or whatever else. There's tons of physical jobs that people can do that robots can't yet do and may never be able to do that you can do. And you don't have to worry about the technology and the tyranny of technology and technology taking you over or taking over your job or taking away the universe or whatever fears people have. I can't keep track of them all. A new one every day, it seems. But there's no reason for that. Technology is just tools that humans use that are invented and created and maintained by humans. And when they're not maintained, they do go away, and perhaps they get reinvented or they get rediscovered or whatever. The need for them pops back up again and they come back into existence. Right. And so when you talk about them that way, they sound less material, which again, I think technology is, both material, but, first non-material. And that it's a very mysterious thing, but it doesn't have to be. It can be something that you understand and can cooperate with. Right? Maybe learning how to use the AI better is just you mastering the tool instead of letting the tool take something away from you. It's a good way to think about it, and then you don't have to be afraid of AI anymore. And also knowing when and where to apply technology, because obviously it's completely inappropriate to have an AI girlfriend. I know that isn't clear to some people, but it's pretty clear to me. It should be pretty clear to you. If it's not pretty clear to you, let me assure you, that's a bad thing. We knew about this already. If you look up ELISA and Weizenbaum and his experiments with the ELISA therapist module, you'll find out pretty quick, long before AI, we were having this sort of a problem with the confusion of what is a human. You thought what is a woman is bad. Now we've got what is a human with AI. And so there's no reason to get upset about these things. These are problems that have been around before. They have been solved before, all the way back. They had automatons in the Middle Ages. They had automaton-like issues way back in ancient Egypt and ancient Greece. And we solved all these problems, right? We've solved them all. And so the solutions are available to us now. The fact that we're calling it artificial intelligence doesn't need to scare you. And once you learn that it's a tool and you learn either to leave it alone because whatever, use it appropriately, then you don't have to be scared of it anymore. You can master it, or at least master it well enough to use that, because all technologies are levers, as leverage to do things that you need and want to do. And yep, you can be afraid that, whatever tech billionaire is trying to leverage to enslave you in the matrix or whatever, if you want. And maybe they are, but that they wouldn't be the first to try, and they won't be the last to fail at it, but they will fail at it. And that is because fundamentally what one person can use as a lever, another person can use as a lever. And sure, the guy with the most money or the guy that has the most followers or whatever will probably win, but they can't maintain that. And so ultimately, yeah, it definitely will have an impact in your life. Some of those impacts will be horrifically negative, right? But they're controllable and they're manageable. and you can opt out. And once you realize that, you don't have to be afraid of it anymore. There's no need. There's no need. And so, look, I appreciate that you focused hopefully on this video and gave it your time, energy, and attention.